Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and you might be noticing that it is Monday, and normally we do Meta Mondays here on the channel, but the thumbnail and the title of this video is a little bit different, a little bit combative, I might say. I apologize for any clickbaiting or I guess, rage baiting we might be doing in the title or, of course, the thumbnail of this video, but it's going to be a little bit of a different one today. Normally on Mondays, we do our typical Meta Monday, we review the tournament results, and we talk about what's going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. However, we're at the very end of this Secluded Springs season. And this last week, until of course the next update comes out and we get a new season, I wanted to spend some time talking about not just about, the results of the tournaments or the best decks or the best strategies. I wanted to talk about the metagame overall, kind of have a little bit of a retrospective, spark some discussion with you guys in the comment section down below. And I really want to talk about what's going on in Pokemon Pocket, not from just a metagame perspective, but also from an overall game perspective about the systems going on and how we can update the game, how we can improve the game. That's what we're going to do basically this week. So this whole week is going to be a little bit different. Of course, we should get an announcement for the next set. It actually is leaked to be, coming in the next few days. So when that does come, that's sort of the content that we'll make. But over the next few days, I want to make two distinct videos. This video today is going to be talking about this season, this metagame, and how I think that people's opinions on the current metagames are actually just not really true. For whatever the reason, I think that a lot of people have a certain interpretation of the metagame this season, of the current meta, and most of those opinions are actually pretty negative. So today I'm going to kind of go right at that. I'm not going to be here to say that you're wrong or anything. Of course, everybody is subject to their own opinions, but I think that there's another problem at hand, and I think that a lot of people are expressing their opinions about the season in ways that I just don't really feel makes a whole lot of sense. So that's what we're going to cover today. But before we get all, into the discussion of, the current metagame and, what's going wrong or what's bad about Pokemon Pocket right now, I actually do want to give a little bit of a shout out to the people that did well at the tournaments this past weekend. We had two tournaments. We had the Daniel C. Mini $50 tournament here, which was about 200 plus players. And this player here playing Guzzlord actually got the win. So Guzzlord won the Daniel C. Mini tournament. Actually, the last four really large online tournaments have all been won by Guzzlord and or Giratina Darkrai, which is interesting. Suicune is kind of the main discussion point of today's video, but it's actually not the deck that has been winning all of these online tournaments. So big shout out to this player. Here's the Guzzlord deck that won. I actually think that Guzzlord is an S tier deck. I believe it's the number 2 option right now in the metagame. But if we go over and we take a look here, if we just kind of go back, we can take a look at the Jody's tournament this past weekend. The second Jody's tournament in a row was actually won by Giratina Darkrai. Again, Minato from Brazil. Shout out to Naruto. I love the show. Anyway, Giratina Darkrai won for the second week in a row of these Jody Coliseums tournament. I think there's a couple of different factors for that. I think that the meta share for Giratina in Jody's tournament was a little bit higher than it otherwise would be, just because it won the previous tournament, and also Jody himself has been sort of showcasing and playing this deck, himself. So I think that, people had a little bit of a bias. There was more people playing Giratina Darkrai this week, in his tournament than, you typically would see. But what's interesting is that Giratina Darkrai in Jody's tournament actually had a losing win rate overall. It had a 46% win rate across the entire tournament, even though it did end up getting first place. And 46% is actually really, really quite low. If we take a look at the metagame here, even Suicune and Greninja was below 50%, but Giratina Darkrai, almost 60% of the tournament meta share and only 46% win rate, while as Guzzlord was only 6% of the meta share, but had a 53% win rate. Flareon struggled, Decidueye did pretty good, a bunch of other decks did well, but very interesting. And I think that a lot of people are going to take a look at the results here, see Giratina Darkrai winning, and kind of interpret that a little bit inaccurately. So I just wanted to go ahead, showcase the player that won, showcase their deck list. But one thing to keep in mind is that Giratina Darkrai has been on the decline over the last 3 weeks or so. This is one point that I wanted to talk about, since we are, it is Meta Monday, we have to talk about it a little bit. I still think Suicune is by far the most dominant deck. In fact, if we go to the Jody's Coliseum tournament, we see that it was 25, almost 26% of the meta share this tournament. But if we go into Top Cut, we see that jump to 36.5% meta share. So had a very, very strong conversion rate. But because so many people in the Top Cut bracket were playing Suicune, that Giratina Darkrai, since it has a fairly winning matchup into Suicune, actually was a very, strong choice if you were to have made it into Top Cut. But as we see, only 7 players throughout the entire tournament made Top Cut playing Giratina Darkrai. So I just wanted to go ahead and showcase those deck lists. I wanted to give people a proper understanding of what actually happened in the metagames these last few weekends. I think that Suicune's still dominating, but once you get into the top cut bracket, it's really about matchups and, hitting the correct variants. And I think that counter Suicune decks like Giratina Darkrai, like Guzzlord are probably your best options to win these online tournaments. But I would say that Suicune is still the most dominant deck list for sure. And I would say that Giratina Darkrai and Guzzlord definitely have winning matchups into Suicune. So anyway, there it is. There's my coverage, really quick coverage of course, the results of this weekend's tournament. Again, that's not what this video is really about, but I did want to showcase those really, really quickly. So the main thing that we're going to talk about today is, of course, Suicune and Greninja. It's on the thumbnail. That is, I think, most people's contentious topic when it comes to this current metagame. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. I'm going to talk about why I don't think that many people's interpretations of the current metagame is actually correct. I'll kind of explain my opinions on things, but again, I would love to hear everything you guys have to say down in the comment section below. I know that the thumbnail and the title of this video literally says that you are wrong, but again, it's a little bit of a clickbait. Nobody's wrong. Everything's subjective. Everybody has their own opinions, and of course, I'm not coming out anybody, directly, right? It's totally okay to have a certain opinion about things, but I think the overall issue with the metagame isn't what a lot of people are talking about, and that's what we're going to dive into. But before we do that, guys, I actually do want to showcase something really, really special, which is going to be the new channel memberships. That's right. We have sort of a new membership tier here on the YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know, I've started to live stream a lot more regularly, not only on YouTube, but on twitch.tv. We have a Twitch channel, which you guys should definitely go check out. But of course, on Twitch, you can subscribe, and it costs $5, and I wanted there to be an equivalent option to that Twitch subscription over on YouTube. So I've created this additional, membership tier on YouTube called Channel Members. It is also, I believe, $5, just like the Twitch sub is. But what I'm also doing is adding some exclusive benefits to all of the people that would like to support me and support the channel and become channel members. So for $5, whether you're subscribing on Twitch or on YouTube, you get exclusive benefits. We are going to be doing members-only live streams. This is going to allow us to, be a little bit more direct in our communication with channel members. I would like to specifically be able to talk about, key decks and key aspects and key points of the metagame. Whatever the channel members want to talk about, that's what we'll talk about in the members-only live streams. I don't have a set schedule for them yet, but they should be very fun, very easy ways to directly, contact me, get my opinions on stuff, interact with me, even maybe play some viewer battles. We could really do anything in those member live streams. I'm actually really excited about them. But again, it will be exclusive to either the Twitch subscribers or the channel members here on the YouTube channel. We also have some exclusive Discord roles for channel members, as well as some Discord channels, right? So a little bit more of an easier time for you guys to directly communicate with me over on the Discord as well. And then we're also opening up sort of my Pokemon Pocket extra card collections for trades. That's something that people always ask me about, is like, hey, I know you have a bunch of extra copies of these cards. Would you mind trading me? And it just becomes a logistical issue because we have so many people in the Discord. Now you guys who become channel members, or of course subscribe on Twitch, whoever has the role in the Discord, will have priority when it comes to trading with me, effectively just allowing you to get all of my extra cards from my Pokemon Pocket account for free. You guys will have priority about that, so that's another benefit. But there's also some new emotes for the Twitch and of course on the YouTube chat. So yeah, I just wanted to showcase channel memberships to you guys. The link to join is just right down below. Like, there's a little join button. You can go ahead and click that, and it'll give you some more information. I also posted a video where I go into more detail about it. But anyway, channel members are here, so it's going to be really fun. Definitely consider that. I would really appreciate any of the support. And again, it's not mandatory. Nothing's changing for the people that aren't channel members. I just wanted to, give some additional benefits for the people that wanted to support me directly. So anyway, guys, there it is. There's the channel memberships. Info about that all is over on the Discord, as well as on the video that we posted as well. So there we go, guys. All right, let's actually dive into the content of today's video. We're almost 9 minutes in, but now we're finally getting to the meat and potatoes of things. So here is what I'm kind of here to discuss today, is that a lot of people are, have negative opinions, I should say, about the current metagame. I think that all really stems from one thing in particular, and that is Suicune and how dominant it's been. So that's the first thing that we're going to talk about. Suicune Greninja as a deck list has been exceedingly dominant for sure. It is definitely by far the most played deck, one of the most played decks that we've ever had in Pokemon Pocket. But I want to go in some more detail about how dominant it has been, or I guess how, strong of a deck this really is compared to maybe some other decks that we've had in the history of Pokemon Pocket, right? So here we're on Limitless. This is where we have all of the metadata from all of, this season, but also the previous season. So let's kind of pull this up in contrast. I'm going to zoom in for you guys a little bit. As we see, Suicune and Greninja right here, the most played decks so far this season, and it has a 19.89% meta share. That means almost 20% of all people participating in online tournaments this season have used Suicune and Greninja. Not only that, but there's also almost a 2% inclusion here for Suicune and Giratina for the people that are playing, of course, 2 copies of Giratina EX, and then any other Suicune deck that anybody might be playing, right? Although I would categorize really only these 2 decks as, that Suicune, Greninja, Giratina combo. Very, very dominant. So again, 20% of the meta share is very significant, and it has a 53.5% win rate, which is literally the highest out of any of the most played decks so far this season. So definitely one-sided, I would say for sure. But what if I told you that that's not something new to Pokemon Pocket? We've seen this type of dominance before. I know a lot of people have commented on, the YouTube videos and on social media saying this is the worst season ever. It's by far the most boring season. Everybody's got their complaints about Suicune, but what I wanted to do was go back to some previous seasons and really showcase that this is not the first time we've seen a deck be this dominant in a particular metagame. And I'm not justifying this whatsoever. I'm just letting you know that compared to some other seasons that we've had in Pokemon Pocket, I definitely don't think this is the worst metagame of all time. So if we go all the way back to the original metagame for the first season, this is before ranked battles, before anything, if we go all the way back to the Genetic Apex season, we'll see something very interesting. We'll see that Mewtwo and Gardevoir was almost 25% of the meta share. Now, this was a very, olden time of Pokemon Pocket. Things were very different. We had much less cards to choose from. It was, the beginning release of the game. And of course, Mewtwo Gardevoir was very dominant, but its win rate wasn't nearly as high as, of course, Suicune was. But 25% of the meta share is definitely a pretty big deal. And also, Pikachu EX and Substrika was the second most played deck, had a very good win rate. But if you go down and you combine all of the different Pikachu archetypes that people were playing, because Limitless did split them up depending on what Pokemon we were pairing with Pikachu, you actually see that Pikachu ended up with basically a 25% meta share as well. So if you go all the way back to Genetic Apex, effectively over 50% of all of the decks that people played were either Pikachu decks or Mewtwo. And I think that's absolutely hilarious if you really think about it. But that's where we started in Pokemon Pocket, right? That was the originality of the competitive scene of Pokemon Pocket. That's what it looked like, and things have changed since then. But definitely from the very beginning, decks have been dominating the metagame in terms of their meta share and their performances. And then, of course, even Charizard right here was about 6.5% meta share, but Charizard Arcanine was about 5% meta share, so that's about 11.5 for the third most played deck. Again, did have a lot of options in Genetic Apex. I'm not justifying Suicune in any way with this data. I just thought it might be interesting. A lot of people look back on the Genetic Apex days and they kind of have their opinions that was sort of the heyday of Pokemon Pocket. But honestly, in my mind, I actually feel like it was one of the least competitive, most annoying metagames that we've ever had. And luckily, ranked battles didn't exist at that time. But again, you can't, you got to give it some slack a little bit. It was the first format. We had very few cards. And of course, certain decks are going to dominate. If we fast forward to things like Triumphant Light or, of course, Shining Revelry, let's go ahead and take a look at Triumphant Light. This was right before, ranked battles came out. So this was the last metagame before Shining Revelry, where it was, of course, our first ranked season. This, in my mind, was actually the worst metagame we've ever had. And again, a lot of people maybe don't remember what it was like because ranked battles didn't exist back then. We only had tournaments, but this was effectively, in my mind, by far the worst metagame we've ever had in Pokemon Pocket. Dialga and Arceus was, again, 20% of the meta share, very similar to Suicune and Greninja, and as we see, a 53+% win rate. So I think what we're seeing right now, of course, is a very similar approach to the, Secluded Spring season as we had from Triumphant Light. A very, very comparable, comparison here. 20% meta share, 53% win rate. Dialga and Arceus was such a dominant deck list. It was so strong, but it was also not very engaging. There really wasn't much to do when you were playing against this deck or playing this deck. It was very, very linear. Most people were very annoyed by this, and Rampardos Lucario was the second most played deck, and this is really because we had, at the very most, sort of a two-faced metagame where you were either playing Dialga Arceus or you were playing Rampardos and Lucario, specifically because it was strong into Dialga and Arceus. As we see, 20% meta share and then 10% meta share. Actually, the second most played deck was 18 Trainer Articuno, which is, again, absolutely hilarious. Really goes to show how far we've come and how awful overall Triumphant Light metagame really was. So that's one example. In my mind, this is the worst meta we've ever had. But again, ranked battles didn't exist at this time. So, that is certainly one thing to keep in mind for sure. But what I do really want to talk about is Shining Revelry. So this is actually the first season that we had ranked battles in Pokemon Pocket, and in my mind is without a doubt the worst ranked season we've ever had from a competitive viability perspective. So this was the dawn of Giratina EX. When Giratina EX first came into the metagame, it was of course combined with Darkrai EX and completely dominated the metagame, and even back then people had a lot of issues. This is the heyday of Giratina Darkrai. This is the origination of what we consider the best deck in Pokemon Pocket, but also the worst ranked season we've ever had. It just happened to be the first ranked season that we ever had. Giratina Darkrai here, it does show 20% of the meta share with a 54+% win rate. Absolutely ridiculous. But the thing you have to keep in mind was that Giratina and Darkrai actually didn't really fully develop until, about a week or two into the metagame. A lot of people were playing Giratina and Mewtwo, which I did in the beginning of that season. So if the metagame had gone a little bit longer, or if Giratina Darkrai had emerged earlier this season, it would have easily been 25 to 30% of the total meta share. Again, this deck list was absolutely dominant. For those who played in that first ranked season, you would know how much of a problem Giratina Darkrai was. But the other main problem with this metagame was Gyarados and Manaphy, the second most played deck. Gyarados in this season, in its heyday, was by far the most annoying deck you could ever play. I think a lot of people have issues right now with how much drawing and drawing the correct cards and luck factor comes into success in terms of winning games in Pokemon Pocket right now. One argument that I would have is that that's always been the case. We'll cover that in a little bit later in this video when we talk more about Suicune specifically. But Gyarados was such an annoying deck list. It was played specifically because it was strong into Giratina and Darkrai. And at one point or another in the ranked season, and this data is from tournaments, but in the ranked season, especially if you were in the Master Ball tier, you literally only saw two deck lists. There was only two decks you would ever see in ranked battles, especially if you were ranked highly, and that was Giratina, Darkrai, and Gyarados. I made a video at the time specifically talking about the main problem with that ranked season because I thought it was such a major issue. And yeah, this was, in my mind, by far the worst ranked season we've ever had. But again, right? I mean, you got to cut it some slack. It was the first ranked season that we had ever had. Whereas now in Secluded Springs, right, we're so far down the line, you would think that things have definitely gotten better. Now, to be fair, after Shining Revelry, things really did trend upwards. I think that we went on an absolute tear of great metagames. After Shining Revelry, of course, we go into Celestial Guardians, where we had Rare Candy. Giratina Darkrai still at the top, but a very dramatic decline in its overall meta share and its win rate. A very, very balanced metagame. Celestial Guardians A3 was a great metagame, a great ranked season. ED Crisis was an interesting one, actually. So Extra Dimensional Crisis, which was the first mini set after Celestial Guardians. A lot of people hated this metagame, mainly because of Buzzwole for some reason. But as we see, only 10% of the meta share for Buzzwole, and none of these decks had a super high win rate. In fact, Guzzlord actually had the highest average win rate. This was also a very, very balanced metagame. But if you go back, a lot of people complained about Extra Dimensional Crisis even back then, which I think a main issue for that wasn't because the metagame was unbalanced or, things were, one deck was heavily dominating the metagame. I think a big reason why people didn't like Extra Dimensional Crisis was about the actual decks themselves, which is what we're going to get into later. We're going to compare Buzzwole to Suicune because I actually think there's some similarities there. But anyway, I actually thought ED Crisis was a great metagame. Then we go into EV Grove, and, this was a little bit more dominant, right, with the Greninja, Sylveon, Giratina stuff. And this is, in my mind, the first ever, I guess, season where, of course, we had Sylveon. And Sylveon changed the game dramatically. I think it was definitely a significant turning point in Pokemon Pocket. As we see, two of the top three decks were playing Sylveon, and that's really because Sylveon was the only card that could draw extra cards in the game, the only Pokemon that could do that. And of course, all of the best decks in the game would utilize Sylveon. And this would be the beginning of what I think a lot of people's issues with Pokemon Pocket currently right now is, which is the draw power, right? I think that, Sylveon was the first one to do it with its ability, but now we have all three of the legendary beasts, specifically Suicune because it's kind of the strongest one of them all. A lot of people have a significant issue with these cards because they do make your deck so much more fast-paced and more consistent, and if you're not playing these select few cards, literally only 4 cards in the game that do this, then you're going to be at a pretty massive disadvantage just because you're not drawing nearly as many cards as your opponent, which is a very limiting factor. We'll dive into that when we talk about Suicune. But anyway, EV Grove was was actually a pretty fun metagame. Wisdom of the Sea and Sky, so A4, the previous season, I actually thought was tremendous. We had a lot of balance. We had Buzzwole still, we had Charizard still, we had Guzzlord, we had Espeon, and we had Giratina Darkrai. Really, really fun metagame. Not only to mention Flareon and Leafeon was a pretty prominent deck list. So also a very, very strong metagame, but that brings us to Secluded Springs, which again is sort of a recurrence of what we were seeing early on in Shining Revelry and in Triumphant Light. This is by far the most dominant performance that we have ever had in a particular season, ever since Shining Revelry and ever since Giratina and Darkrai bursted onto the scene. So what does that really tell us, right? Well, what it tells us is that we definitely are on a decline in terms of the overall, I guess, balance of these metagames, right? If you take a look at that data, it's actually been on the incline in terms of, the top most played deck being the most dominant. Suicune and Greninja is actually the most dominant deck that we've had ever since Giratina Darkrai came out in Shining Revelry. And I think a lot of people are a little bit upset about that. As we talked about, Shining Revelry was, of course, not the greatest metagame we've ever had. But I think that Secluded Springs is actually a bit better. Because Giratina and Darkrai and Guzzlord are actually two really strong decks specifically into Suicune. Not only that, but we have other options like all of these lightning type decks. We have Dragonite, and of course we also have things like Skarmory and Decidueye, which have entered the metagame later in the season. Suicune and Greninja actually has a ton of counterplay to it. The issue with Suicune and Greninja, similar to Giratina Darkrai back in the day, is that even if you do have a winning matchup into Suicune and Greninja, chances are it's not going to be that strong of a win rate, right? It's going to be anywhere from like 55 to 60%, which is definitely strong, but it still means that you're going to lose, around 40% of your games or so, which, obviously doesn't feel that great. Suicune and Greninja is probably the strongest deck that we've ever had. If you, I guess adjust to inflation or power creep, at this point, a year into Pokemon Pocket, for any deck to be this dominant with Giratina Darkrai in the format, with all of the Ultra Beasts, with all of the Evolution cards, with Rare Candy, Suicune and Greninja is probably the strongest deck that we've ever had, and it really comes down to Suicune in general. So that's going to move us to the next point of this video, which is talking about Suicune. But again, this whole portion of the video I wanted to really illustrate that, we've been in this situation before. A lot of people have told me that this is the worst season that we've ever had, but honestly, I really don't agree with that. It's just been a long time since we had, a ranked season that was heavily dominated by a #1 top deck like this. We've never really seen this before, so it's a bit unique. It's been a while since we've seen something like this, but it is something that happens in TCG games. It's something that happens in Pokemon Pocket from time to time. Hopefully we see some correction in the metagame and in the viability of Suicune next season. We'll have to see exactly what they do here. But in general, I would not say that this is the worst season we've ever had by a long shot, but it is the worst season we've had for quite some time, which is definitely something that isn't great when it comes at a time now where a lot of people in general are just a little bit bored or tired of Pokemon Pocket because it has been out for almost a year now. That's the other thing for sure that we're going to mention today is the steady decline of the player base. That's just how games work, right? People in general just get bored of things after a while. It's just the way it goes. Pokemon Pocket in my mind is a really, really fun game, but at the same vein, I think that not much has really changed in terms of how the game is played and the options we have in which we play the game over the last 6 or 7 months ever since ranked battles come out. I do think we're going to see a major update when, of course, B1 comes out and we get the 1-year anniversary. I think that's going to really be effectively Pokemon Pocket 2.0. I'm really excited for that, but we'll cover all of that stuff in tomorrow's video. Today is more about the metagame and about Suicune and Greninja specifically. So let's talk about Suicune and Greninja because this is a very, very dominant deck list, but I think a lot of people's issues with this deck list actually comes down to not just Suicune, but and not just, Greninja and Giratina. It comes down as like a bunch of different factors that I think a lot of people just don't really like. So here's the thing. Whenever you have a particular new card or a new deck that, becomes exceedingly popular, as soon as it enters the metagame, you kind of shut off a lot of people from participating with that deck list just from the nature of Pokemon Pocket and the difficulty that we have to get specific cards. There's so many players, at least in the first couple of weeks of the season, that did not have access to Suicune. They just didn't pull Suicune EX from the packs. Maybe they were free to play players, maybe whatever the case may be. They just weren't able to get Suicune EX, which feels really bad for those players, right? Because this is the new top deck. It's the best way to climb rank battles, especially in those first few days in that first week. And if you didn't have this card, then you were just behind. But the interesting thing about Suicune and Giratina is that on paper, this deck list actually should be like a champion of Pokemon Pocket. People should love this deck list because it encompasses so many different things that, really add to the gameplay experience of Pokemon Pocket. That is, of course, if you have these cards and you can play them. Suicune EX is a brand new card that came out in Secluded Springs, but Giratina Darkrai is a card that came out in Shining Revelry. Greninja is a card that came out from Genetic Apex. It's been around since the beginning of Pokemon Pocket. Irida, a very good supporter card here, I believe came out in Triumphant Light. I could be wrong about that. Cyrus came out in Spacetime Smackdown, so did Mars. And Rare Candy, of course, came out in Celestial Guardian. So the deck list is encompassing a bunch of cards that came out from expansions throughout the entire year of Pokemon Pocket, which is kind of what you want. A big downside or a big aspect of the decks in Extra Dimensional Crisis back then that people had an issue with was that they were kind of pre-built deck lists, right? Basically, every card from Buzzwole or Guzzlord, which were two of the strongest decks at the time, were almost entirely made up of cards that came out in that particular expansion, right? They were like pre-built archetypes. And it did hamper a little bit of the originality, or I guess the feeling that people had of creating, a creative deck list, because it was kind of pre-built for you. But Suicune and Giratina and Greninja doesn't have that issue. This deck plays cards from so many different expansions, and it all comes together to be a really, really strong deck. Now, in theory, that should be a really good thing, right? Because it's a bunch of cards from a bunch of the old sets all coming together to be really strong, pairing up with a new card, right? So in theory, from a gameplay perspective, that actually seems really cool, but I think that actually comes up with one particular issue that a lot of people have at this point in Pokemon Pocket, which is the difficulty of getting cards that you didn't get from previous expansions, right? For players who are coming into the game right now or came into the game over the last few months, they may have a difficult time, acquiring 2 copies of Suicune from the most common set, going all the way back and getting your Greninjas from Genetic Apex, getting your Cyruses, getting your Rare Candies, getting your Iridas, getting your Giratina. For players that haven't been playing Pokemon Pocket for the last year, or people that don't spend money on the game, it might be quite difficult to get all of these different cards from all of the different booster packs over the past year, right? So what seemingly seems like a really good thing in terms of like the health of the deck list actually ends up, I think, being a really hindering factor that a lot of people are unable to build this deck because it's so reliant on cards from previous expansions. And I think that is one factor that really does play into the ability of not many people being able to play Suicune, but the people who, of course, do or can't play Suicune don't really love, right? So that's an interesting thing to note. I just wanted to mention that. But let's talk about the aspects of this deck in particular. I think a big reason why at first glance people don't like this deck is because it plays Giratina. At this point, Giratina's seen play in so many different decks. It's been seeing play for so long. People are just tired of Giratina, even though it's really not like the main aspect of this deck. It's just sort of a throwaway card that theoretically makes the deck better, but it's not super important to the deck list, I would say, compared to the other cards. People immediately see Giratina in the deck and they think, oh, that's very original, very unoriginal, not very fun, annoying that we get to, face Giratina again in a new broken deck list. People in general just aren't really happy about that. So whenever Giratina is in a deck, that's certainly one issue. But the other issue with this deck is something that actually previously existed in a previous deck that's very similar to this, which is this Sylveon Greninja deck list, which dominated a previous metagame, a previous season. And I think that's another additional factor that made people really sour to Suicune immediately, was that it was so similar to a deck list that people already played or played against for an entire season somewhat recently. The only difference between this deck and Sylveon is that it's better. Instead of playing Sylveon, we're playing Suicune, which functions similarly. We don't have to play dual energies, and we have more space in our deck to play things like Irida or extra copies of Cyrus or whatever, right? So basically, it's not even that new of a deck list, right? And I think that made people really annoyed, which were like, oh, cool, we get to play against this again, but now it's even better, and it encompasses a new card that I don't maybe have yet, right? So that's another additional factor for sure that made people really annoyed about Suicune. But the other major issue I would say that, I think a lot of people, at least for me in particular, that makes this deck really annoying is the combination of Greninja and Cyrus, which has been one of the strongest combos in the history of Pokemon Pocket. Greninja with Water Shuriken allows you to damage bench Pokemon on the turn that you're able to play Cyrus, and then I'll also attack with an attacking Pokemon like Giratina or Suicune. So not only does Greninja add additional damage, but it also allows you to choose which Pokemon you want to attack, which is a gameplay style that isn't very fun because we have no real way of playing around it, right? It doesn't matter if you retreat to the bench and you bring up a full HP Pokemon, you're really struggling to play against this deck in the late game because they have so many options with Greninja and with Cyrus. It's really not a fun gameplay, aspect of this deck list, it really is one-sided and there's really no counterplay to it. I'm really hoping we get some significant counterplay to Greninja and Cyrus specifically, because that in my mind really is the most annoying part of this deck list, and it's not actually Suicune. And let's talk about Suicune, because Suicune is the face of this deck. It is the front runner of this deck list, and I think it's the subject of a lot of people's criticisms. But in my mind, I think most people are wrong. I think that Suicune is an incredible card, and it's actually a very well-designed card. I've been saying this for quite some time now. Some people might disagree with me. It just pairs really well with a bunch of other cards that are, of course, very, very strong, and it all accumulates to a very strong deck list. But Suicune EX is actually a very well-designed card. It's a card I actually quite like. Now, this card is effectively broken. This might be the best card we've ever gotten. It does everything. It literally does everything for you. It's a basic Pokemon, which makes it just inherently more consistent than most other cards. It has 140 HP, which is a lot for a basic Pokemon. It's a water type, which means you have access to things like Irida. And also, it has a broken ability, Legendary Pulse, allowing you to draw an extra card at the end of your turn. This is going to be one of the more significant things that I think we have to really discuss when it comes to the overall health of the metagame moving forward. The cat is sort of out of the bag, I guess, is sort of my interpretation of this here. Ever since they released Sylveon, specific decks that can utilize these cards that draw extra cards are just going to be better because they draw cards. And drawing cards is going to allow you to, of course, have more options, be more consistent, and in general, just be a stronger deck list. The issue with Sylveon, at least at the time, was that not every deck could utilize it very well. When they released all three of the legendary beasts, they gave us a water type, an electric type, and a fire type basic Pokemon that you could play in really any of those different types of deck lists that also allowed you to draw cards. It just so happened that the support and the structure around Suicune was better than, lightning type or fire type especially, which made Suicune really the only, dominant, example of those three Pokemon, those three cards that came out in Secluded Springs. However, I think Raikou is actually still very underrated. A lot of people don't play Raikou, but it is a very, very strong card anyway. But yeah, so the ability to draw cards is actually broken. It's way stronger than I actually anticipated it being before these cards were released. Even like in your first two turns, the ability to draw 2 extra cards in your first 2 turns actually mathematically makes your deck so much better, especially when you're playing rare candies and Greninjas, and of course 2 copies of Irida in your deck list. So this deck oftentimes has at least 1 copy of whatever kind of card or combo that it wants to by its first couple of turns. Listen, the math just sort of worked out in a way that I didn't really expect. And yes, the draw power of Legendary Pulse and all of these Pokemon is actually way stronger than I thought it might be. But again, even though they did give us 3 different Pokemon, we're still very much handicapped, right? Like we're handcuffed, right? In the sense that we have 4 cards, just 4 cards in the game right now that if you're not utilizing them to some degree, you're at a distinct disadvantage. And, I think that takes away from the overall health of the metagame. I think that people are kind of pointing fingers at Suicune a little bit too much, but in general, the cat is out of the bag. And I think at this point, the only way to fix this issue in the metagame is to just release a bunch of more cards that can allow decks to move more quickly, right? And I think that's kind of the future of Pokemon Pocket. I think moving forward, every deck is either going to play Suicune, Entei, Raikou, or Sylveon, or any other new cards that they have come out that are either cards that disrupt these cards' abilities to draw or also draw cards. So again, the cat is out of the bag. We can't really take cards away. We can't, really change the cards. I mean, I guess they could, but they probably won't. They're not going to ban cards, which I know some people talk about. They're never going to ban cards. So yeah, we're going to be kind of, pigeonholed a little bit. We're going to be forced into playing these specific few cards that are just inherently stronger than any other cards in the game. But lastly, about Suicune, we're going to talk about something that I think, a lot of people maybe don't agree with, but it's something I really do feel is the case with Suicune. And why I said that this is actually a very well-designed card earlier in this video, and that is going to be the Crystal Waltz attack. So not only does Suicune, draw you cards, have a lot of HP, can heal it up, it does good damage, but it's also a control card, which is crazy. So that's what I mean by it literally does everything. Crystal Waltz does 20 damage for each Pokemon on you and your opponent's bench, which is a big deal because basically your opponent's actions can influence themselves as well as your ability to deal damage. Not something we've ever seen in Pokemon Pocket before, but actually ended up being one of the strongest attacks that we've ever seen. So this attack can't deal a ton of damage, like realistically speaking, but for 2 energies, it can consistently deal, 60, 80, 100 damage. But what it really does is it limits your ability to play the game how you want to. It's a limiting card. It is a control card, which people very much don't like. Most people will tell you that they don't love playing Guzzlord and having Guzzlord flip a bunch of coins, flip heads, and then discard all of your energies. It's not interactive, you have no way to counter it, and unfortunately, sometimes you're unable to play the game. Suicune does kind of that same thing. It forces people to not bench Pokemon, and if you didn't know, in Pokemon Pocket and in really any TCG, you have to play cards to win the game. So any card that limits your ability to play cards is going to limit your ability to be creative, to make plays, and to win games. Literally, the way to play around Suicune is to not play your cards, which is really silly in a very counterintuitive way of playing Pokemon Pocket. And I think that's a big reason why maybe people don't love Suicune, is that yes, it's really strong, yes, it's annoying, yes, it draws cards, but it limits your ability to play the game, and it restricts what you do. Not only that, but playing Suicune and playing against Suicune is actually a little bit more complicated. I say relatively speaking, more complicated than any other decks that we've had in Pokemon Pocket. When you play with Suicune and against Suicune, you have to think maybe 1 or 2 turns ahead. You have to think, if I bench this Pokemon now, how much damage can I take next turn if they do Rare Candy Greninja, if they evolve, if they have another basic Pokemon in hand, if they get 2 attacks on me over the next 2 turns, is it going to add up enough to KO me? If not, do I not have to bench this Pokemon? Do I hold these Pokemon in hand? If I do hold these Pokemon in my hand, will I get red carded? Will I get Marsed? There's a lot of decisions that go into playing Suicune and playing against an opponent that is using Suicune that I think it actually greatly increases not only the power creep in Pokemon Pocket, but it increases the skill gap. This is an important part that I think a lot of people aren't very comfortable in talking about, and it really leads me to like my number one thing that a lot of people have talked about with this metagame, which is talking about like the RNG aspect of it, right? So many people play Suicune, they don't play around it, they don't play a counter meta, they don't, they just play all their Pokemon on their bench, and they get mad when their opponent, of course, draws some extra cards, and they get Greninja out on turn 2, and they get their board full of basic Pokemon, and they hit you and want to KO you on your second turn. A lot of people really don't like that play style, but again, it forces people to play the game in a way that they are not really used to playing, right? So in a weird way, I'm not trying to shame anybody that, of course, doesn't play Pokemon Pocket a lot, but again, for the casual player, for the player that, doesn't really understand the game at a really high level, Suicune is a very, very difficult opponent because it's not apparent, right, to a new player, to a casual player, somebody that isn't experienced competitively with Pokemon Pocket, how they should be defending themselves against this strategy. We saw a similar thing to this, to Buzzwole back in the day. People didn't know exactly the best way to play against Buzzwole because it wasn't super apparent what they should be doing to play, right? You had to make certain decisions. Should I not, bench my Pokemon on this first turn so that they take damage with Pheromosa? Should I, of course, hit the active, or should I play Sabrina? Should I not KO him here in case he has Lucamine in hand? Should I play Red Card this turn? Should I play Mars this turn, or wait another turn to KO? Playing Buzzwole was actually kind of similar to playing Suicune, and again, these are matchups that greatly complexified, that's not a word, but they increased the complexity of the matchups or the experience of playing against them in a Pokemon Pocket game. And of course, Pokemon Pocket is all about, drawing the right cards. They're 20 card decks, very, very fast-paced games. And that's one thing that I just really wanted to tackle here, is that a lot of people have been talking about the RNG aspect of the season, that the decks this season are very reliant on drawing the cards they need to, and it really just kind of feels a little bit like a draw card simulator. But one thing that I just don't understand when people say that is that that's literally been the case since the beginning of time in Pokemon Pocket, and really any TCG. RNG is a very significant factor, I would say, in really any card game. Pokemon Pocket has that a little bit accelerated just because, the games are faster and the decks are smaller. So, every card you draw just matters a little bit more. It's a little bit more important. But this season, I would say that the actual RNG aspect of drawing cards is actually lower than it ever has been. If you're playing any of these decks that draw extra cards, then, RNG is less of a factor because we're drawing more cards. We're more likely to get the cards that we need, so we have more options to make plays with those cards that can allow us to win the game. So I know that, if you're not playing Suicune and you're playing against Suicune, you're going to feel like you're always behind on card advantage. Card advantage is definitely something I talk about a lot here on the channel. If you have 10 cards in your deck and your opponent has 4 cards in their deck, it's very likely that they're going to have more cards that they need than you do at that given moment, right? So I get that feels bad, but when it comes to the RNG aspect of this metagame, I actually think that's kind of way off. I don't really believe that's the case. In fact, if you go back to what I believe is one of the best metagames we've ever had, being Celestial Guardians, the RNG aspect of that season, before we had any of this extra draw power, was actually extraordinarily high, and it was kind of the origination of what we call high roll decks, which is like, hey, do I get rare candy on turn 2? If I do, the game's over. And like a lot of people at the time didn't like that. But again, Celestial Guardians was one of the most played ranked seasons and one of the most popular times in Pokemon Pocket. And people look back, fondly in that season, even though back then I would say the RNG about drawing cards was actually way more significant than it is now. So when people talk about, the RNG aspect of the game right now, I think that they just are coming from, a place of maybe they're just unlucky, or maybe they're just overall fed up with the game and they're kind of coming up with things, I guess, to say is the issue with the current metagame. So again, that really loops up, and we'll wrap up this video here because it's getting a little bit long, but most people talk about this game in a way that I just don't think is that realistic, right? This ranked season isn't by far by no stretch of the imagination is this the worst ranked season that we've ever had. Is this the worst metagame we've ever had? It's just not, okay? Suicune's not the most dominant deck we've ever seen. It's not the most played deck we've ever seen. Yes, it's a very, very strong deck, but RNG isn't as rampant in Pokemon Pocket as it has been previously. One thing I will say, though, is that, the options are a little bit more limiting now than they have been in previous seasons, just because, of course, certain decks can draw a bunch of cards and certain decks can't, right? So you are a little bit limited, but hopefully they expand upon that or they give us some counterplay to that. I certainly think that is a real issue. And I'm not here to tell you guys that there's no issues with the metagame, that this metagame is perfect. The game could always be better. But one thing that I really want to tell you guys here that I just really want to nail down, and it's one phrase that I actually really like in this given scenario, which is don't yuck other people's yums, which is a weird saying, and I believe that's how you say it, but maybe it's not even a real saying. But effectively, if you don't enjoy Pokemon Pocket right now, or if you just don't like playing the game, then that's totally fine, right? If you have some issues and you want the game to be better, then feel free to, comment, post on social media, let people know what you think the game should change and how it can get better. But, don't make other people feel bad for enjoying the game currently right now. Sure, things could be better, but things could always be worse. And I genuinely believe that the game has evolved in a really fun way. I'm actually having more fun this ranked season than I have in previous ranked seasons, and I think overall the complexity of the game, the enjoyment of the game, and the creativity of the game is actually in general on the incline, even though right now we might be at a bit of a crossroads in terms of our options and everybody's playing Suicune. But yeah, don't yuck other people's yums. I currently really enjoy Pokemon Pocket. The last thing I want is everybody in the community just complaining about arbitrary things about the game that may or may not be true, just to make the game, seem like it's, in a bad light, right? If you're watching this video, it's because you have some type of an, vested interest in the game, in the metagame, or in, I guess, me or my channel, which again, I definitely appreciate. And maybe I do come at this as a little bit of, with a little bit of a bias, right? I make content on Pokemon Pocket, specifically competitive content, so I have a different interpretation of, how things are going right now. This is coming from somebody that does spend money on the game, that always has the cards from the very beginning. I can sort of interact with the game to its absolute maximum, and I have a lot more perspective maybe than other people. So I want to definitely, be wary of that, be understanding of that. But at the same vein, I personally also have a vested interest in Pokemon Pocket. I want it to do well. I enjoy playing the game. I enjoy making content on the game, and I'm always going to be looking for, or I guess, appreciating the upsides more than I am, I guess, clowning on the game for its downsides, right? Every game has downsides, but that's one thing that I would say. Don't hate on the game just because it's not fun for you right now. Just because you're not having a good time with Pokemon Pocket doesn't mean other people aren't having a good time. And in general, just a lot of the discourse that I'm seeing in the comments and on social media just genuinely doesn't make any sense, which again is the, inherent point of this video, that me blatantly just saying in the thumbnail and in the title that, that you're wrong. But again, I'm not talking specifically about you, and I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying that, the game isn't really where people think it is. And this is what we're going to wrap up the video on, which is that I think a big issue that most people have with Pokemon Pocket right now is that it's just been out for a long time. There's just in general, a sense of people getting tired with the game. Nothing really has changed. We don't have any new game modes. We don't have any new systems. The pack rates haven't been changed. Trading was updated minorly a little while back, but it's nothing super substantial. The pack point system is still a real thing. The crafting system is poor. There's a lot of things that need to be changed about Pokemon Pocket, but when we talk about the competitive metagame, which is what we do here on the channel, we have to be real about this, right? I personally do take a little bit of a, I take it a little personally when people come in and they tell me how bad the metagame is, how unhealthy the competitive aspect of Pokemon Pocket is right now, but just because in a lot of ways, I just don't really believe it and I don't agree with it, which is what this video is really all about, right? I'm not trying to clown on you guys. Everybody's entitled to their opinions. In fact, I definitely encourage you guys to comment down below and let me know what you guys, think about everything that we talked about in today's video, anything we didn't talk about in today's video. Again, I don't write a script for these type of videos. I just go, right? So if there's anything I left out, I apologize, but, be civil, feel free to comment down below and let me know what you guys think, because really I want what's best for Pokemon Pocket. I really enjoy this game. I want everybody to not hate this game. I want everybody to enjoy this game because I do think that there's a lot of fun to be had with it. Again, Pokemon Pocket is going to have issues, right? It's just the inherent aspect of the game. RNG is a core aspect of Pokemon Pocket. It's more of a, a casual, you sit down and you kind of play your cards, and maybe it goes well for you, maybe it doesn't. I think a lot of people just maybe go on bad luck streaks, or maybe they make just sort of a misplay somewhere along the line that loses them the game, but they don't realize what that misplay was, and then they get mad and they go to the comments and they say that it was all bad luck and that the game sucks. Honestly, I think most of the time people lose because they probably made a play that they shouldn't have. I know that's most of the time why I lose for sure. But there's definitely RNG to the game. That's just the nature of it. I think a big skill, the number one thing we always say on the channel is that the number one skill gap in Pokemon Pocket isn't necessarily how you play the cards when you're in a battle. It is making sure that you're playing the right deck for that game, for that situation, for that metagame, which is why this channel exists, is to let you guys know what deck lists are the best to be playing at any given point in time. And hopefully, it goes well for you, but maybe it doesn't. It's just sort of the, the luck of the draw, I guess, right, is how the game works. But we're on a rant now, so let's wrap this up, guys. I apologize for the aggressive thumbnail for the title of this video. I just wanted to, to be fair, I just wanted to get people interested to click this video, to hop in and then have, a nice, healthy discussion about the metagame and my opinions about it, because honestly, I just feel like people are just saying a lot of stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, and they're really kind of showcasing the game in a bad light, when again, thousands and thousands of people are playing this game every day and they enjoy it, and I am one of them, and hopefully the game gets better. Hopefully, the game gets updated, the metagame changes, which it will next week, and we're gonna get new cards, and hopefully it's even more fun than it was this season. So there we go, guys. A bit of a long video, just a massive rant. This was just a massive rant. However, channel memberships are a thing. Definitely go check out the channel memberships, guys. I definitely appreciate all of the support. And again, I just want to interact with you guys a little bit more directly. We will be live streaming more as well. So yeah, there you go, guys. Comment down below, please. I love to hear your guys' opinions. We talk about it in the Discord all the time. But again, make sure you keep it civil. Make sure you keep things polite down in the comments. But, the discourse is definitely very, very important. So that's this video, talking about the metagame, talking about Suicune, talking about the real issues and not the issues that people think is happening. Tomorrow, what I might do, and again, I know this is Monday, normally we do Meta Monday, but tomorrow is Tuesday. Normally we do tier lists on Tuesday. I don't think we will. I think tomorrow I'm going to spend some time talking about how the game can be improved, not from like a meta perspective or from a competitive standpoint, but from actual like in-game updates, like systems and the actual just application itself, the ways that they can update the game, how I would change how Pokemon Pocket works in general. That's what tomorrow's video is going to be all about. Again, I want these videos to maybe reach the developers of the game, maybe not. This one was more, community focused, but tomorrow's video will almost be kind of a message to developers, where I would really love you guys to share your opinions about, how you think the game should change, what they should add, what should they remove, what should they change. That's what tomorrow's video is really all about. But anyway, guys, there it is. There's the last Meta Monday of the season. Not really something that many people probably anticipated, but I just wanted to put my thoughts out there, and I wanted to really give some accurate perspective on what this metagame is really like, what Suicune's really like, what this deck is really like, because, again, the last thing I want is for people to kind of take a look at the community, take a look at the game and think, oh, that's not something I really want to get a part of. We want to encourage people to play this game. We want to encourage people to join our community, to have fun with Pokemon Pocket, because I do think that it's a really, really fun game. So again, guys, comment down below, let me know what you guys think. Let's get out of here. We've talked for a very, very long time. I apologize if this video was hard to follow, but I'm very good at ranting, and I'm very good at talking about Pokemon Pocket. That's what we do best. Anyway, guys, channel memberships, go ahead, join down below. Big shout out to everybody. Go check out the Twitch. We're live streaming more often, maybe tonight as well. Who knows? Peace out, guys. Have a good one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you guys soon. And yeah, bye.